Okay, we gotta talk, chat, and I deeply want everybody's opinion on this, and I want to say up front, if there's differing opinions in the chat, nobody is wrong. Everybody is entitled to their own opinion. Um, but we gotta talk about this game. I am frankly not very pleased with what they did with this movie game. And let's be real with that for a second. This was a movie game. There was more cinematic esque movement in this game than there was any gameplay. And that includes just pressing W to move forward and hearing the dialogue, because that's essentially a cutscene. Like, if all you're doing is walking from one place to another place, not doing anything, you're not getting collectibles, you're not having fights, you're not using items, you're not doing anything except moving from point A to point B, that might as well be a cutscene, especially if that point A to point B is filled with dialogue that pushes the story along. If I judge this on a film aspect for the story, I would give it a 6 out of 10. I think the story of this game was frankly not good. Um, if I even try to think about it aside from the first game as its own thing and not try to hold it up to the pedestal that the first game is on, because the first game was magnificent. It was really good. The story of this game just wasn't that great. It wasn't. And I'm sorry, if you like the story, great. I didn't find this story that great or even that well told. Like, Senua is a person that is dealing with psychosis, which is a very, very severe mental illness. And you don't know what is being real and fake in this game. And by fake, I mean hallucinatory visions caused by her psychosis. Now, they show you things through the game which try to hint at things of what's fake and what's real. And by the end of this game, the entire journey could have just been a hallucination through and through. Now, the first game was the first game mostly a hallucination. Yes, but it was also an actual journey from point A to point B where she was actually dealing with things and going through things, and the game led to that and it described it, and you understood and felt and dealt with these things with the character as they were going through them. Yeah, there was no new narrators unlocked. Um, and you go through these things with the character. This game didn't really do that in the same way. It left it up into the air to where through a large majority of the game you're like, okay, are you actually showing me hallucinations? Or are we supposed to believe these characters are real? And they don't go any creative way to tell you that they're hallucinations. They do things like, oh, they're there and then they disappeared, or oh, they're talking about this boss fight that you just had, which is clearly a hallucination, so they must be a hallucination. If we're talking about the story, which part of it I don't frankly understand at the moment, and I'm going to have to do some research online, which is the second boss fight, the second giant on the beach, which was for the trailer. I don't know who that's supposed to be. The first boss fight appears to be her fighting herself, and what we can only presume to be the loss of her own child, which wasn't necessarily told in the best way, because in the original game, at the end of it all, she realizes she's dealing with her own demons and her own struggles, and that was kind of the beauty of that game. The realizations. That was never a realization had in this game at all. Period. The second boss, I don't know who that was. Was that supposed to be Dillian? Was that supposed to be a friend? Was that supposed to be the good side of her father begging her forgiveness? I don't know. If somebody knows, please let me in on that, because I have no idea who that was supposed to be. The third fight is clearly supposed to be her father. More dealing with inner demons, more dealing with stuff. and it really doesn't, it didn't feel like it was told terribly well. There were no moments in this game for me that were like really emotional parts of the game like the first one was, especially at the end of the first one. This game didn't have that. The gameplay itself, talking besides the story, was very minimal, to the point that there was almost... and gameplay felt like an afterthought. Except for the last battle in that arena, and one battle before it fighting the dudes with the flaming bottles that they would throw at you. All the fights were super easy, and even that last fight was pretty damn easy. None of it felt like a challenge. None of it felt like you were overcoming or conquering anything, which should have been part of the difficulty. That was the beauty of the first game. It was part of the difficulty, is you were doing the struggle, especially in that last fight in the original game. Fighting an unbeatable fight that you wanted to keep going, and they built it up until you realized there was no winning. You had to lose. But you didn't really lose. It was acceptance. This game didn't have anything like that to make any of the fights meaningful. The puzzles in this game were not puzzles. They were going from point A to point B. They were all going through the motions. They weren't puzzles. Even in the couple things where you had to line stuff up, which was the really interesting mechanic of Psychosis included in the original game, which is supposed to be an illustration of people dealing with psychosis, see meaningness in objects or things that aren't necessarily there. Thus seeing the symbols and lining things up to make it into something maybe more than it actually is. This game didn't really do that well, and in fact, it handheld the hell out of you. In the first game, you had to be really precise to line things up to solve what you're looking for. In this game, you saw in several instances, I would hold the button and it would move my character over and line it up and do it for me. Which was like, why even have these then if you're just going to give it to me? It doesn't make any sense. Man, it was just not well done for any of the puzzles, any of the mechanics of the gameplay. The special in this was not really adding anything. It was making the fights easier. The last boss battle, you had to use the special, but it gave you the special. It wasn't like you had to charge it up or get moves or get wins in the fight to charge it up. It's like, no, here you go. We're going to charge your special. Now just use it. And was fairly disappointing. You know, talking about the game, for those that just saw it now at the end, what you saw of the game was not how the game originally looks. I modified the game files using some help from some people online that felt similar frustrations to make it to make it full screen rather, and not have it in an ultra wide format, which was, I think, a horrible decision. We talked on this a couple times throughout the game. I think that was a horrible decision. I understand that maybe they wanted to add that as an immersion mechanic. If you have an ultra wide monitor, the game is more immersive than ever to feel like you're there with Senua going through these experiences, because maybe they were struggling to find additional ways to put immersion into the experience, so they thought that they would give it a ultra cinematic experience. It was horrible. Yesterday, I did not enjoy that at all, to have that limited of a view on my monitor. Changing it for today made it so much more enjoyable, even if I think the story and the gameplay were kind of crap. Going through the crap was at least more enjoyable, because I could see more and at least appreciate the visual work that they did in this game. Also, turning off the lens distortion and chromatic aberration in the settings, which you can't do in these settings, you have to do it in the actual configuration file, did a lot to make the game look clearer and to have it be more appreciated for the work that they did. You know, the story was just all over the place. I mean, you start, which you don't even know what was true or what wasn't true in this game in terms of what actually transpired. What, did she ever actually get captured by the slavers? Maybe. I think maybe the only person that survived initially was her and the original slave master, which became our friend in this game. But we killed him, if we're supposed to believe that. And then after that death, I think everybody else on the beach was potentially dead. And we were the sole survivor, which is why when we saw him again later, she made that comment, oh, he's still alive? No, he's probably dead. And this is a hallucination. Which means that literally every single thing after that moment was hallucinations. And none of the game actually happened. We may never have gotten that far off the beach. In fact, there were so many beach segments of this game that we probably never really left the beach. We could still be wandering the beach for this whole experience, or at least an adjacency of the beach. Or the shore, I should say. I'm not trying to be, I don't want to come off sounding so negative or so critical about it. Like, I loved the first game immensely. And I'm sure that does, to a great deal, affect my feelings of this game, largely being that of major disappointment in how underwhelming this title was for something I was looking so forward to. Just not delivering on so many levels. I can't help but feel disappointed. Let's switch over to the camera, and I had on a notepad, I think, some other points I wanted to mention, and I want to see what you all felt about this. Get other people's opinions and points of view on this. So let me switch to camera. Let me also turn on some music here while we continue this discussion. There we go. See if I can pull up my notes here I had, and then I'll switch over to chat and see what everybody thought about this. The notes I had before I started stream today, and see how much of these hold true to now the end, and then I'll catch up on chat. I just want to get through this real quick. Sound design itself was good. I felt like it had depth and volume, and is by far the best thing about this game. That is very true. The use of the voices, I feel, was way overdone. Now, that's hard to say, frankly, because that may be a real representation of the amount of voices somebody with this particular disorder may experience. The problem with it is not necessarily the fact that it was way overdone in terms of how often we heard them, but the fact that it was backseating the game. It didn't necessarily add a substance other than it feeling like it was constantly telling me where to go in the game and constantly backseating me. And again, maybe that was intentional for more to illustrate this particular illness, but it did feel a little overdone to me, and I think they could have drawn back specifically on the backseating element of the voices. The game itself is sold as a horror title, and in the first game you kind of see why that was, and you know, it's a horror title for what was there and also for her experience and having what she has to deal with going through this illness. This didn't feel like a horror title to me. It felt like a story, a movie game that maybe had some looks to it that felt a little horror, but ultimately felt more like an action drama than anything for this. The direction of the game, as I mentioned earlier, felt a little all over the place. It started as a revenge story, really lost its way in that along the way, turned more into, you know, as with the original, dealing with inner demons, but it didn't feel like a focused thing like it did in the original game. In the original game, we had a focus through the whole way through trying to avenge Dillion's killers. This went from killing the slavers to befriending the slavers to fighting giants to fighting our inner demons to, I'm not sure. It didn't feel focused to me in its ultimate objective. Without removing the widescreen and the lens distortion and the chromatic aberration, the visuals of the game were disappointing. If you remove all that, the visuals are great. I think they need to add the removal of those in the settings menu because it definitely improved the game quite a bit. Another note, puzzles, as mentioned before, were super boring. They weren't even puzzles. just going through motion activities, and were way too easy. Combat felt pretty lame to me. Special took away from it feeling like you needed skill or anything to do except for mostly button mashing. And even without it, if you didn't use the special, the fights were not difficult by any means. The last note I had here before stream today, that this felt like more of an interactive movie. It was barely a game, and the game that was there felt, frankly, a little uninspired. And I generally stand by all those statements. They did not improve by the time we finished the game. Let me read chat here. You've played and watched this, but I still feel so lost, confused, and disconnected with Senua. In the first game, I felt so connected to her, feeling the story, and it was heartbreaking. This was a real letdown for me. Absolutely fiendish, 100%. First game, you felt connected to her story, to her journey, through what she was experiencing through all of it. And this just misses that for me on every single level. There was no connection there, and it was a lot of just wondering, like, is this real? Why did they have to tell it this way? This doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I feel like I'm just going through motions. It's not adding up. And the boss fights, like, God, why couldn't they have made those boss fights better? Like, you're fighting giants. They could have done something super special. Instead, you're running through an obstacle course, cutting chains for the first one. The second boss giant, you're running through an obstacle course just to reach the giant. There was no, like, they kept stressing, she knows how to defeat them. She knows how to defeat them. She just has to figure out their name and then reach them. And that's it. That's not really... It felt underwhelming, to say the least. Macaw, welcome on in. How you doing today? You've just been lurking and the last few streams and literally have no idea what Hellblade 1 or the story was, but the combat here from a visual standpoint reminded me of Rise, Son of Rome, with the simplicity of it just having a sort of sword and savage visceral force of it that was very visually cool and appealing to you. It looks cool. The fights look very cool. And if I was watching from a stream perspective, and I can say that because from the trailer, watching the fights in the trailer, they looked great. Playing them wasn't so good. It was kind of boring, frankly. The first game is fantastic, though. It is so good. And I would recommend people play the first game. And this game doesn't take away from the first game, because the first game ends on such a powerful, amazing note that you can go without playing this and you're not missing anything. This game didn't add a single thing to the universe. It really didn't. It doesn't necessarily take away from the universe, but it is so skippable. So skippable. The overall experience reminded me of a PlayStation 4 launch of The Order. The Order had more dynamic combat despite similar focus on the story and set pieces. Story-wise, of those voices made you go insane. Your eyes kept going from the bottom of the screen to the subtitles, but maybe it's integral part from the original. It seemed like a lot of very hollow stuff from the dialogue. So in the original, the voices were there to add so much depth to understanding her psychosis. And not necessarily the story of the psychosis, just the experience and what people hear and what might be doubt or second guessing, or, you know, the overall, dare I say, intenseness that leads to a feeling of madness with that. And you felt that, and it was scary in the original to hear that, to be like, man, you're going through this, you're hearing these voices, it's driving to a level of madness that just feels like you're losing it. In this one, it felt like people backseating you for the game. It didn't have that same drive at all as the original did whatsoever. The combat was far better. Combat in the first was far better. In your book, having multiple enemies felt like you were scrapping fights, struggling to get through instead of these 1-1 deals. Hell, reminded of you making fun of the martial arts. You know, just talking about the fights, like, there was only a couple times I died in this game, largely in the giant battles, when you would just disintegrate or get washed into the ocean, and it would just take you back a step to where it didn't even try it. Like in the original, if you died, it would show this rot mechanic, like you're being overcome by the negativeness of the illness, or at that point you didn't know what it was, but that's what it was. Like, it's overcoming you, it's overcoming your mind, and you're succumbing to the mental illness and losing yourself in it, and it would grow more and more and cover more and more of your body in the original every time you would die. In this one, it just respawns you. There was none of the rot. There was none of this really cool mechanic to aid to trying to describe the struggle for the mental illness. It was like, no, it was nothing. It was just respawn, try again. There's nothing there. Found the voices in the first game more mocking and genuinely horrible and far scarier to have in your head. Yup. The voices always sounded less harsh and horrible. It always didn't feel like the same intimidation from there. It was just constant annoying chatter. Exactly. Exactly. Okay, it wasn't just me. I thought the voices seemed nicer, almost that they wanted to be more. Yeah, they were just way nicer. You know, frankly, like, this is a game, I'm going to uninstall it and I will never play it again. This game, for what it was, is a solid 5 out of 10 to me. Is mediocre. It was a poor attempt to have a sequel. And in fact, like, you know, almost shame on Ninja Theory, frankly. Shame on them for what they did to the trailer for this game. Because in the trailer to this game, they kind of frankly sold the mental illness aspect largely to get hype up for the trailer. And if you ask, what do I mean by that? Watch the trailer again. When they show her, like, chanting to herself with a blood red face, and clearly in that trailer had reached a breaking point to where you're like, what happened to her? Why is this a thing? I gotta play this game to see what happened to her to reach this point of complete mental collapse. You know, you expected something really strong from the game. It's like, no, they just flaunted that in the trailer just for, like, whatever fucking thing to get people to buy the game, which, all things considered, with how they treated the original game and the subject matter as a very serious thing, it almost feels frankly disrespectful. If I'm going to just be completely frank, like, very, very not happy with it. They did not take the same level of respect and storytelling in this game that they did for the first one. And that's not me saying anything negative to the cast or the voice actors or anything. That's strictly to the writers for this game. If I can say anything positive for this game, mocap was done very, very well. The full body mocap in this game I liked and thought they did a really great job. I thought the fighting sequences looked very cool. I thought the environments looked very cool. I thought there were times when I was watching all 3 of them talk, especially towards the second boss fight when the beach was on fire and they were talking with each other in the midst of the battle. I thought that looked very, very good, and a level of realism I don't know if I've necessarily seen before in games. And I thought that was a great achievement for them for that. But this game was written so shitty that it really takes away from all of that for me. I don't know what to say. I'm just frankly very disappointed, and I can't recommend this game at all. It's a hard pass. I'm going to write a negative Steam review. I feel bad for all the people involved that worked on this game, especially coming from a game that was something of a pinnacle, an achievement in the gaming industry, to producing something that felt like they were more going through the motions and forcing a sequel of something so successful. This was a forced sequel of a really good title that should have, frankly, at this point been a one-shot. Agree with me or disagree with me, that's fine, but I was just not impressed with this game. That being said, we finished it, guys. We've made it all the way through. Let me read this comment here before I jump into that. Love the camera here always being seamless. The camera work was great. Going from environment to environment was very seamless. Towards the end, they did it a couple more times than I would have liked. I would have liked more journey, as much as it was just A to B walk storytelling. I would have liked to have seen more of the environment towards the end. But it was very nice how they did that and had a very cinematic look how it would pan from one to another, which again leads more to this being a movie game for its presentation than a game. But we finished it. We did it, chat. We went all the way through. We experienced this sequel together. If you watched the original with me, we've now experienced both together. And here's hoping they end it here, because I frankly don't want them to do another one. If they do another one, we'll probably play it, I guess. And I will say that we will play it, so don't buy it before we play it and see if it's worth it. But hopefully this will be the end of Senua Saga. And we can just remove this from our minds and think fondly of the original release.